Hey Diva. I'm finally here. I'm finally making the video. I had a few different, one-on-one, 101, Jesus. I had a few different 101 topics that I've been wanting to talk about on this channel. If you don't know me, hi, my name is I am a kink and BDSM lifestyler, and it is also my special interest. So I have a lot that I want to share about the basics of BDSM with folks who are maybe wanting to introduce themselves to the IRL community and get into kink and BDSM in real life, but don't have all the tools that they need in order to do that safely and effectively. Oh my God. So I thought that I would package a lot of those one-on-one topics into one video because it would be a lot easier to do. So I'm going to talk today about the top 5 tips that I have for you to attend your first dungeon or play party. I've been attending kink events for about 3 or 4 years now, I want to say. You know, depending on what timeline we're going off. I often see, I know that I probably would have been a lot worse off if I had entered a dungeon space without having watched a fuck ton of YouTube videos about the subject, right? I definitely want to pass that knowledge on to some people because I know a lot of folks engage in their kink primarily online. And then when they go to transition over into IRL spaces, it's usually kind of a culture shock, right? So I'm gonna let you in on some advice that I have so that your first event will be as successful as possible. Now, of course, let's go over a few things. A couple expectations I want you to have that isn't necessarily part of my list is, first and foremost, just because you attend the play party does not mean you are guaranteed play, right? It is other people's decision on whether or not they want to play with you. You are not owed that. I have seen some people publicly complain against my home dungeon because nobody played with them on their first night. Hey, that's nobody's fault. That is nobody's fault. It's probably not even yours. It just didn't happen that first night, and it usually won't for most people. And I honestly recommend on your first dungeon night, just see what's going on, right? I know that looks exciting, but it's a very good option in order to acclimate yourself to your local dungeon's culture and make sure you're not getting into any sticky situations, right? So like, you're not guaranteed play when you go to a dungeon. Second of all, the IRL kink community has a lot more etiquette than like online kink spaces, right? And this is what I'm going to be walking you through today. Some of that etiquette that you're going to want to research before you enter the space. That way no one looks at you funny and you look like you know what you're doing, right? Okay. First thing I'm going to recommend is, if this is possible for you, if you have this available in your area before you go to the play party, I would recommend attending a munch. Okay? Now, a munch is a social event, a non-play focused event, usually at a restaurant or like a cafe or something, or like a bar, where your local kink community is going to gather to just be with each other, right? A lot of us make a lot of really deep connections within these communities, and this is part of that, right? And so a good way for you to get to know the people in your local community, what they're about, what they're not about, before you engage in any sort of play with anybody, is to attend these munches. And this way you could also get to know, like, maybe some of the rules of the dungeon, because every dungeon is going to be a little bit different, right? What is allowed in the play space and what is not allowed, what's encouraged and what's discouraged. What is the culture of your local scene? That is a great way to get to know this, as well as start making those connections before you engage in play, which can be very anxiety relieving because it's hard to approach people that you don't know very well, right? So this is a great way to get to know people before you go to a play party. So I would highly recommend doing that. That's what I did, is I went to a munch first, and then I didn't go to a play party for like a year. okay? It helps me open up my mind. It helped me really understand what this lifestyle was all about before I started getting into the fun stuff, right? And I think that's a great thing to do. I think it's a good thing to do the research and the learning before you engage in the activities, right? Okay, next thing I'm going to recommend that you research is scene negotiation. Now, when I say scene in this context, that word essentially means like a specific activity that you are setting out to do for kink reasons. A really good basic example I like to give is if you are sitting down with somebody to do some spanking for 10 to 20 minutes, something like that, that might be a little long for you, honestly. I don't know. That's how it goes for me. But if you're sitting down to do some spanking with somebody for however long, and you are just setting out to do that activity, that is what we call a spanking scene, right? So this is just like, we are going out of our way to do this kink activity. That is what we call a spanking scene, or that is what we call a shibari scene, a blood play scene, you know, like whatever kink activity you're doing, that is a scene. Now, for scene negotiation, I know that this doesn't sound very exciting because it's not really what we see in kink media, right? You don't see a lot of talk of negotiation and that whole process when you're, say, looking at kinky prawn, looking at like kink films like The Secretary. There's not a lot of scene negotiation happening. However, it is a very integral part of engaging in play in real life, especially if you're going to these public spaces, or semi-public. Essentially what this is you and your partner or partners that you are going to be engaging in play with all sitting down together and talking about what is and is not on the table for your scene. What is allowed, what is not allowed, what is completely off limits for you, and for whatever reason, right? So let's say that you are going to be engaging in a degradation and humiliation scene with somebody, where they are going to be degrading you or you're going to be degrading them. And one of you has triggers around, say, like your weight, right? That is something you're gonna want to bring up during negotiation is, hey, you can degrade me, but don't talk shit about my weight. It's really triggering for me. As I'm sure you can tell, that's a bit of a problem for me. Talk about like what you do really enjoy, what you do want to be included in this scene. I have seen people who are very new to IRL kink spaces have a really hard time asking for what they want and saying like, well, shouldn't that just be obvious? No, because everybody wants different things, even if it's common, right? So like a lot of people are into gags. I'm not. It hurts my jaw. And so during a kink negotiation, if somebody is like, hey, do you want to use a gag? I have to be like, no, I don't want to do that. Whereas like somebody else might be like, why do you even have to ask? Of course I do. You do have to ask because everybody's preferences are different. So you have to state exactly what you do want and exactly what you don't want to happen. Okay, and I mean everything. You gotta let go of being shy around asking for what you want, because that is the only way that you're gonna get what you want, because we do not do, most people, right, especially with beginners, do not do implicit things. Like, it's not like, oh, this is implied, this is, this seems obvious, of course we do this. No, nothing is obvious, nothing is like, well, of course this would be included, because everybody is different and everybody has different wants and needs and preferences and triggers. Girl, I'm gonna get you. So I know that it can be kind of nerve-wracking to state exactly what you want and what you don't want and what would upset you to be included. But scene negotiation is essential to making sure everybody has informed consent going into a scene and making sure everybody's walking out of that scene feeling good and satisfied. And that also includes if your kink is sexual or not. I do want to add, as a kinkster who is on the asexual spectrum, that is often a conversation I have to have, is how intimate is this scene going to be? So that's another thing to keep in mind, because if you're a very sexual player, not everyone is. Next, we're going to talk about play frenzy, is what I like to call it. Although you'll hear a lot of people call it sub frenzy. This is not exclusive to submissives or S-types, bottoms, etc. A lot of D-type folks and switches also go through frenzy when they enter a new play space, and it's probably gonna happen to you the first time that you enter. So I just call it play frenzy. Now, what this refers to is the phenomenon of, let's say, entering a new dungeon for the first time and seeing all the cool things that there are to do. You see these St. Andrew's crosses, you see spanking benches, you see wax play materials, you see suspension rigs, blah, 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 blah. You see like play mats for pets and littles. And you're like, this is so exciting. I'm so ready for this. I want to do everything. Calm down. Let's bring it back. Let's center ourselves. Let's ground ourselves. You're not going to get to do a fuck ton. and that's, you know, again, as I was stating earlier, I highly recommend that for your very first play event, you either keep it to like a scene that you're going to be doing that you might be trying out for the first time, or you don't play at the first event. You just observe what everybody's about, what everybody's doing, and you learn, right? And then you can get into the shit once you've like kind of met some people. But undeniably, there is this feeling when you enter a new play space that like everything is so exciting and you want to play with all of it. That's frenzy, right? That is, I'm gonna do all of this shit because it's so exciting. I'm so ready to just have all of this accessible to me now. Best friend. What happened to me the first time I experienced frenzy was I entered my home dungeon for the first time. And I got so excited to do anything at all that I approached the first person I saw with an impact tool set, and I asked her to play, and I ignored all the red flags. Luckily, I did not end up playing with her because I got kind of insecure and I left early. But it could have ended really badly because looking back on that, I did not want to play with her. But it's good to like recognize when you're feeling frenzied and kind of try to ground yourself from that. Because you don't want to jump into a scene with somebody when you don't really know what they're about, you don't really know what their reputation is, you don't really know what you can handle. I almost jumped into a really heavy paid play scene when I could not have handled that at the time, right? Don't want to do that. You know, if you don't know exactly what your limits are and you start jumping into really intense shit because it sounds fun, that's gonna end really poorly for you, at least emotionally, right? So when you're feeling frenzied, when you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I want to do all of this stuff, this looks so fun, this looks so exciting, limit it to like one thing that seems pretty manageable, maybe not super intense, and get that itch out that way, right? Very good idea to be trying to look out for those feelings. Kind of a like opposite but equal to that, I'm gonna say is you need to research drop. Sub drop, dom drop, top drop, blah, 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 whatever. You're gonna want to research drop, because if you do end up playing at these events, you're gonna feel it, and you might feel it pretty hardcore. Now, drop is the phenomenon where after you engage in play, I usually experience it a day or two after I engage in a pretty heavy scene. After you engage in play, you are maybe going to feel really depressed, really anxious, really low motivation, really tired, lethargic, fatigued, all those words for sleepy. You might even feel irritable, you know? You're just gonna feel some bad feelings. Now, this does not happen to everybody, but it does happen to a lot of people, and it is something we all need to watch out for, and that's why aftercare is so important, right? It's because not having aftercare after something that is very emotionally intense for us, or maybe even physically intense for us, that increases the likelihood of drop, and it also increases the likelihood that drop is going to be very intense. So we do aftercare to mitigate that damage, right? Now, the reason that this happens is because when you are engaging in play, you are building up all of these big fun reward chemicals in your brain, all these endorphins, and all of that is getting used all in one place as you are engaging in play. I start to experience this a lot when I'm doing really heavy impact, for example, because my body's going through a lot, my brain's going through a lot, and it's a lot of fun. And then the next day, I've used up all of those happy reward chemicals, and I don't have any left. So I experience subdrop, and that can be really hard. It's very exhausting. Okay, it makes me feel really depressed and unmotivated to take care of myself because I don't really have a lot of energy left in me. And so it's very good for your top to reach out to you, or for you to reach out to your top, although in my opinion they should be reaching out first, checking in on you, and trying to help you through those emotions, right? But that is probably a thing you're going to experience at some point or another. Most people do when they engage in BDSM, especially, again, those more physically intensive activities. I don't tend to experience drop when I'm doing just role play, for example. And when you're not aware of what drop is, when you're not prepared for it, you can feel like maybe this isn't for me. Like, I feel like shit after I do BDSM. Maybe I shouldn't be doing it. No, it's a very common side effect, and it is very easy to cope with as long as you have those tools. So I would be mentally prepared for that. I would have an aftercare plan before you engage in BDSM. That's going to be part of your negotiation process. And that way, again, you can mitigate the damage and then talk about what your check-in's going to be like the next day or the next 2 days, you know? So just be wary of that, please. Last thing I'm going to recommend for you is please have an open mind when you enter a dungeon space, okay? I know, especially online, there is a lot of discourse about which kinks are ethical and which kinks are not ethical, and which ones are okay to practice and which ones are not okay to practice. That's not going to exist here. Okay? When you go into an IRL dungeon space, there are going to be very few kinks, most likely, that are straight up banned from the space. And usually those ones have to do with, like, playing around bigotry, in my experience, right? Like, that is not something that would be allowed in my dungeon, is if you were doing some sort of bigotry roleplay. Not that, you know, it's not like the admins are saying, like, you can't do that at all ever, just don't do it here, right? But, like, depending on which dungeon you go to, and my dungeon is a leather run dungeon, so there's a lot of edge play happening, you're gonna see things that are gonna squick you out. And even if you're not at a really intense, like, leather run dungeon, you're gonna see things that are gonna squick you out, because everybody has things that squicks them out, and some people have more things and some people have less things. I have very few things. It is very important that you learn how to say, this isn't for me, I'm gonna leave the room, and then take a deep breath and leave the room. I know a lot of people, when they first enter dungeon spaces, are grossed out by certain role plays or, like, physical activities, things with, you know, blood, water sports, things like that. It is very important that you learn how to take accountability for your own discomfort and then leave, right? You cannot be kink shaming people in these spaces, or you're not gonna be welcomed back, okay? So if you don't think you can handle that, if you don't think you can be that guy, then you probably shouldn't go to these spaces. But if you really want to go, then you really need to have an open mind. And I'm very grateful that when I went to my first ever munch, I met a couple who were engaged in a roleplay style that I did not understand at the time. And I learned that they were not the monsters that I had been told that these kinds of kinksters were, right? And hopefully that'll happen for you if you hold these kind of biases. But even if it doesn't, you'll still learn how to cope with those feelings of discomfort in a way that isn't bothersome for you anymore. So that is like a very important emotional tool to have when entering these spaces. Because again, if you don't have that capability, you're not going to be welcome back. All right, so that is the end of my list. Let me know if there's any additional tips and pieces of advice that you have for first-time dungeon goers in the comments below. Let me know if I missed anything big and obvious, or if you have any words about what I listed here. Again, my name is please subscribe. I'm trying to like make this more of a hobby that I do. I might be a bit before I upload again. I'm gonna start moving soon. I'm gonna be moving in with my girlfriend, so I'm a little occupied with that for sure. But thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Bye, Diva.